If you're in racing, you probably want to make at least some calculated risks to be the very first. In chocolate production or in food production in general, you want to be a little bit careful on taking risk. As a matter of fact, you don't want to take any risks when it comes to, quality and food safety for your end consumer. When I went to France, I did speed courses in French. I had some background already. And, I did the same in Indonesia. I mean, let's be honest. If you want to work on a shop floor or close to the shop floor, and if you cannot understand a word of what people are saying, it's very, very hard to, on one part, integrate, and on the other hand, also have a clear impact. So yes, we're completely vertically integrated, and we like to say always bean to bar to you.
Welcome to the Connected Shopfloor Podcast, where we explore real stories and big ideas that keep the factory floor buzzing.
Wow, this is the final episode of the second season, and I could not be happier with the guest we have today. Lawrence van der Berg's career is nothing but remarkable. He started by designing systems for racing teams, moving on into the chocolate world, and now making the best premium chocolate I have ever tasted. We will explore how that transition happened and the current challenges of scaling this fast-growing company while keeping quality at the center. Now, he has worked in many different countries, has an awesome chapter in Indonesia. He started as a supervisor and went into the position of COO, and there are so many lessons that today we will learn about. We will also look ahead. Is automation finally ready to deliver on its promises? Is the solution today the one we want to have, or are we just at the beginning of this journey? We'll cover this and a lot more. I hope you like it. I'm Marco Chan, and this is the Connected Shopfloor Podcast. I know you started by designing chassis and suspensions for racing teams, and now you're turning cocoa beans into premium chocolate bars, which, by the way, I had them last weekend, and they're so good, so good. But my question is, when we see these two different worlds, are they actually two different worlds, or in the end, it's like production, manufacturing, supply chain, all the same thing?
Well, I think they're very different worlds, but it does remind me of one thing. I used to have this manager in Belgium who would always draw this parallel between Formula One racing and food production or chocolate production. He used to say, back in the days, the pit stops, they would take over a minute time. And nowadays they manage it doing it under 2 seconds. And, he would always kind of use it as leverage. Now, you guys show me how fast you can do your or how you can optimize your changeovers. And, there are parallels like that. But in general, I would say they are very, very different worlds.
I can imagine they are, but it just touch on that exact point, which is, I imagine like an environment where you are right now, and we will talk a little bit about the different transitions, but where you are right now, at least from my perspective, when I go to one of Läderach's boutique shops, it looks a very premium savoir-faire kind of an environment, right? And if I look at Formula One and racing teams, it's like super precision, as you were saying, counting seconds and all of that. Does that translate into day-to-day operations?
In a way, yes. I mean, I think it's both about quality and performance, wanting to be the very best in chocolate making or wanting to be the very first to come out into the race. And I think the other part as well, if you can't really compare just the machines and the equipment as such. Very much in racing, it's about the machine, but your processes and the people in the background as well. And I think premium chocolate production, in a way, is very much like that. It's not just about having the highest quality product in the end. It's about how you work together, how you connect machines, people, and processes. The most fundamental difference, however, is in risk management. If you're in racing, you probably want to make at least some calculated risks to be the very first. In chocolate production or in food production in general, you want to be a little bit careful on taking risk. As a matter of fact, you don't want to take any risks when it comes to, quality and food safety for your end consumer. So yes, again, there's definitely a lot of parallels you can draw, but there's also clear differences in both worlds.
But when we look into a production side, there's this raw unpredictability there, which is completely different. Do you like that? Like, do you like waking up in the morning and not knowing, what's today's problem going to be?
But I have to disagree a little bit with you on that one, Marco. I'll give you my perspective on that. If you go out on a racetrack, you might look into the forecast and you can have some idea if there's going to be rain coming or not, but you just don't know. You also don't know what your competitors are going to be doing, if how they're going to be driving that day. In chocolate production or in food production, where quality is key and a very high priority, you want to make sure that you look ahead a little bit and know sort of what's coming. But of course, I mean, you're experienced enough yourself and know the industry well enough. Yes, indeed, I admit there's always things that you can't really foresee. There's always these things that happen and new things that happen that you will have to solve either on the spot or going forward, for sure. But I think the difference with racing is, again, that it's a much less a risk environment.
And I understand the pushback, because I think like you can only figure out how many small little problems might occur when you're there and when you're actually doing that work. And as you said, there's a lot of things that can happen. But also thinking about like these different perspectives that we are now just talking about, I know that you yourself, you had the chance to work in operations in many different countries and actually in different continents. When you look at that, and for instance, your experience in Indonesia, which I can imagine is different in Belgium and so forth because of different cultures, is it really that? Is it like a reality check when you get there compared to Europe? Or is it in the end the same thing? Processes, production, and so forth?
I mean, culturally, there are differences. I think the most interesting experience for me was, you have to imagine I went from being a shift supervisor, about 25 years old in France, where when I entered, everybody around me would say, whether they were peers or team members, they would say, who's this guy? And, what is he doing here to come here and tell us what to do? To going to Indonesia, where suddenly it's, hello, Mr. Lawrence. And yes, Mr. Lawrence, I will do exactly as you ask me. I had to learn very fast, however, that, it's they write it in every little book. There's this thing called power distance. And, hierarchy means something very different in a country like Indonesia. That doesn't mean, however, that, it's easier as a manager to work there. Because what I had to learn also is that because of those power distances, it's not because people tell you something that's also necessarily what they will mean. Just because a direct approach, a very confrontational approach, people might want to answer you more in the direction of what you want to hear rather than what's the underlying truth. And there's no good or bad there in either very direct versus indirect cultures. But definitely something that you need to take into account.
But you also have the language barrier, right? Which, especially when you go more towards the shop floor, you want to connect to people working there. You want to, help to change the way it's being managed or improve any problem you have. How did you overcome that?
So language-wise, I actually took language classes of Indonesian.
Seriously? Wow.
Yes, I did.
Congrats.
I did the same in most parts of my international career, I would say. When I went to France, I did speed courses in French. I had some background already. And, I did the same in Indonesia. I mean, let's be honest. If you want to work on a shop floor or close to the shop floor, and if you cannot understand a word of what people are saying, it's very, very hard to, on one part, integrate, and on the other hand, also have a clear impact. The good thing about Indonesian is that grammar is not that complicated. It's just about learning it by heart. So yes, I took some courses there and it helped me communicate the most important words or questions like, by when is this getting done? And the answer, a very typical answer being there, besok, if I remember it well, which means tomorrow, which could mean anything really other than today.
Anytime in the future that will happen.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Whoa, I was in Malaysia and it was like, first of all, they have like different, languages there because they have different cultures, but Malay, the main one, I learned some words, but really get into the language is a hard one. Are you now learning German? For instance, you're in Switzerland right now, right? And German speaking or in the French speaking part?
No, the German speaking part. And I've been here for 6 years and it was exactly the same. So when I arrived here, and that was tricky for me as well as a plant manager at the time, my German was not at a good level. So I took intensive courses. The good thing about languages is you need exposure. If you have no alternative, if people won't understand you in English or any other language, you need to learn the language and you will learn the language relatively quickly. So yes, I speak German.
High German, by the way, also.
Well, yes, I speak High German. I always say I speak.
No, sorry, Swiss German. I meant, yeah.
No, that one I understand. I always tell people I speak something between High German and Flemish, but luckily I can understand Swiss German, and most Swiss people can understand what I'm saying, or they're pretending they are.
You were just describing your stay in Indonesia, and that time it was for a different company. And Barry Callebaut was a company that was very much focused on B2B industrial supply chain, right? It was a little bit, which I imagine, different from what you're doing at Läderach, which is, as you explained to me, is from cocoa to bar. So you do the whole vertical, and then you go directly to the consumers and in these high-end boutiques. Is it two different worlds, or are we talking about chocolate cocoa and producing bars in the end?
Well, it's similar world to the extent that both companies process or grind cocoa, produce liquid chocolate, and turn it into other chocolate products as well. It's a very different business in that BC is very focused on the B2B world. They have business to business customers, and Läderach used to be a company that was into B2B, but since quite a while now we're a B2C company. So yes, we're completely vertically integrated, and we like to say always bean to bar to you. So we don't use any sales channels other than our own physical retail stores, or of course online web shops.
By the way, that changed from the B2B to B2C. Was it when into 2004 you guys acquired a big group? Was that when the shift happened?
I mean, that was a very pivotal moment, and I think that's also so interesting about Läderach, how it's evolved throughout time. So yes, it started in the 60s, and it was a family company. It's still a family company, by the way. It was always premium chocolate oriented, but in a B2B world. And then in 2004, what they did is they acquired, I believe, Mercure. They acquired Mercure, which was a brand with, I believe, over 40 chocolate shops. And just like that, they had direct access to the consumers. And that's where, it started transitioning from more a B2B brand into a B2C brand. And internationalization started. And then in 2021, I believe, Läderach took over 35 leases of US Godiva stores, which again, was a very, very big and bold move to have exposure into, one of our currently most important markets being the US.
Just go a little bit back to what you're saying. It's from bean to bar to you, which is awesome, right? Now, is it a little bit different? Do you feel the pressure on a daily basis from an operational side as you're responsible for the whole operational side of the group? Do you feel that pressure is different when the supply chain doesn't work and shelves might be empty from a B2B where, you don't have as much contact with the end customer?
Well, I would say in a way, the whole demand planning, if that's what you're referring to, is a little bit easier in a completely vertically integrated model. Because the thing is, we have, full visibility from when and where we source the beans all the way up to when we're going to sell the chocolate in the stores. And in a B2B world, you're very dependent on your business customers. You're not always aware of when they're going to place their order. And in most cases, you're not aware in how they're currently selling their product. So, you have a little bit of an advantage in a vertically integrated company where you're closer to the consumer. Information there is key. Nevertheless, there will be always pressure when it comes to making sure the shelves are never empty. I'm not saying that that's an easy topic, but there's definitely differences.
Looking into that, I think sometimes it's interesting because when you have this supply chain of different players, you're very dependent on them, but they also have buffers for you. They also can absorb some of the problems. When you're fully vertical, as you're explaining, then you're all on you. You have to count for all the different steps. And when you look into that, like the small little butterfly effect that you get from small problems in one place that have ripple effects in another place, do you see that happening if you have a problem with cocoa being sourced in West Africa to that impact that can have later on a few months on the shelves of your boutique shops? Does that happen or not that much?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, again, there's a lot of benefits to being completely vertically integrated and a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, yes, the one downside is you carry a lot more risk, because you're responsible for the whole chain. And you need to make sure that you have a plan B. And risk management, again, is very important in this one. Now, when you talk particularly about cocoa beans not arriving in time, Cocoa is an interesting raw material, and luckily there's only 2 harvests a year. And luckily we have some shelf life on raw cocoa to that extent. So it's not because, a cocoa shipment is late that immediately we have this huge butterfly effect for us not being able to deliver. But, I can tell you a recent other example, which it can come from any corner. We opened a new store in North America, and I got this call from our global supply chain manager saying we have a problem. We're already out of stock, 2 days after opening. So it's these things as well, where sometimes your demand, if you go into a new country or even a new location within an existing country, you need to plan demand, and you might not always have all the information. And of course, at that moment, you have to react and solve the issue ASAP, because you do not want a brand new chocolate store without any chocolate inside.
But come on, it's a super awesome problem to have, right? When demand is higher than planned. I do understand it's a struggle, and I can imagine like all the spotlight is there because everyone is looking to that. But come on, it's a good way. It's a good one. Yeah. It's a worse one when no one is going there and you just, I bought too much. I prepared too much.
Exactly. It's a good problem to have, but you can imagine internally there's expectations then that your operations department, your production, your supply chain delivers, But yes, as a company, it's a great problem to have.
Just trying to understand that a little bit better. You're growing quite well and now getting to different markets. Can you share a little bit which are the markets that you guys are pushing more and where you see growth happening in the next years?
Well, I would say that we have growth happening in existing markets already. I would say that in Switzerland, we have been present for quite a while. So, growth numbers, we are growing in Switzerland, but growth numbers look very different than other countries where we're not as known yet. So I would say our approach is quite international now. We're focusing on the Asian market. And as I said, as well as on North America, there will be European countries that we're not present at yet today, which will be entering soon. So a little bit all over the place.
That's awesome to know. And as you said, it was a family-owned business, 60 years old, right? So it's growing quite rapidly. But you yourself, if I may, you also transitioned quite a bit. It was not just countries, as we said before, not just from a supervisor to a COO position, but you also transitioned from a more technical background, which we were just talking about before in the beginning, racing and so forth, to now a management role with an MBA, INSEAD. So it seems to me that it changed quite a bit. Are we talking about two different ways of seeing the world when we look into management and engineering backgrounds? Or is it just different levels of the organization, seeing the forest or seeing the trees?
Well, I would say they're not different worlds, but yes, you get new perspectives, of course. If you're starting in a purely technical function, you might not have as much connection to the business side of things, and I was fortunate enough to have during my career kind of an increasing amount of exposure to, other parts of the supply chain, and more importantly, also the business aspect of things.
I'm very close to the production shop floor area. And, people are always saying, I'm firefighting the whole day. I cannot improve. I cannot focus on improving and building. I need to firefight. Do you see that also as into different levels of the organization, or is it more a pure operational problem?
Well, I would say I've seen factories that have that issue, and I've seen very different departments that have nothing to do with operations that also have that issue or that challenge. And I think usually a lot of departments or companies will at some point go through stages like that, especially when you're looking at extreme growth. Now, where I don't think it is a good thing is where it's continuously like that, where you have people only firefighting for years on end. Then I would argue then probably there's room for optimization there.
Help me understand a little bit now. Now, as you get in the office on a Monday, what is normally the things that you look into your calendar, you look at your week, you plan a week ahead? What are the things that concern you the most, or where you want to focus most of your energy nowadays?
Well, where I focus most of my energy is, again, going back to that good problem that you described I have. I will remember that every Monday morning, by the way, when I wake up, I'll say, remember Marco told you it's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have, believe me.
Exactly. But you're right, because, we are growing, or we have been growing a lot over the last couple of years. And I see, one of my assignments to make ourselves scalable, because we have a lot of plans for the future. And again, we spoke about us being vertically integrated. All of the chocolate has to come from my operations team, and we need to be ready that we can cope with this, as I like to call it sometimes, almost exponential growth, not only today, but also in the mid and in the long term. So, strategically, my focus at least is mostly on that. And next to that, although I told you, every company goes through firefighting modus, I've never met any operations guy that doesn't at least have some part of firefighting as well. So I'll admit that part is, part of my weekly calendar as well.
The world is changing quite a bit. Not just geopolitics, but also, as you know, technology is shifting. If I would ask you now, if I may ask you, if you look at your year, the goals that you have for this year, do you think that they are completely different than, for instance, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago? The things you look at are the topics you focus on?
I wouldn't say they are fundamentally different, but there is definitely, at least it feels that way, that the level of uncertainty in this world, does not seem to go down. It seems to go up to some extent. And especially for companies that have a very large international exposure, it's very much about being able to pivot and to deal with macroeconomic changes rather quickly and to remain flexible and lean. But other than that, there's no big changes. But if I would have to point out that one, it would be being able to deal with unexpected changes on a macroeconomic level.
Again, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, is you have this technical background and this management background. When you look into things, like when you're discussing, I imagine on a board level, you're discussing different topics, where to invest, how the financials are, our P&L. Do you think that people care from a different perspective? The more technical people care on different problems than the more management one, financial ones? Like, do you discuss a lot with your CFO different things, or you have different problems or concerns than they have?
I mean, I think it's very important in any team, whether it's an executive board or a shop floor team. You need to have different roles and different perspectives. It's about how do you, close the gap if you're not exactly talking about the same thing, because sometimes you might not be talking about the same thing. When we're talking concretely about technical aspects, what I've learned throughout my career is being able to explain a technical issue to people that are not engineers or to people that are not in depth into that kind of topic. Being able to explain it in, let's say, words that anybody understands is almost as important as being able to understand the issue yourself in the first place.
Let me quickly thank today's sponsor, ProGrow. On this podcast, we often talk about the impact of data and AI on manufacturing sites, and something that comes up again and again is exactly the lack of data, and more importantly, the lack of clear, actionable insights. And that's exactly what ProGrow does. Trusted by more than 100 organizations, from the food and beverage industry to the automotive, covering virtually any sector of the market, ProGrow helps manufacturers get real-time insights from their machines. So visit progrow.ai and download the free app. Thank you. I get that. But do you think that it's easier, by the way, and this is a tricky one, do you think it's easier to do a person from a technical background to do the jump to management, or from management to technical?
I honestly don't know. I don't think there's a good or a bad way there. I wouldn't know. I think I made more the switch from technical to management. I can imagine it having worked just as well the other way around. It's just about perspectives.
You said something that is very important, I think, and I totally agree with you. In the end of the day, I think most of the discussions are we looking at the same information? Do we have the same information as the basis for this conversation? And this brings a lot to data part, right? We need to look at the same data. We need to look at the same reports. Does it happen throughout the whole organization that data is missing and we're looking at it from different angles, and that creates problems and need it? And how can we solve that, by the way? Do you see an angle where with technology we will eventually solve that gap?
There's a lot of room for improvements in general. Is that nowadays we collect so much data, but then in the end don't do anything with it or don't deal with it correctly. And I think technology in the future, especially when it comes to maintaining or getting the right relevant data, being able to filter it correctly and turning it into the right recommendations, I think there is still a huge amount of potential.
But do you see that from a whole supply chain, from bean to bar to you, so many different processes, so many different systems, do you think that we will be able to get a centralized view on the data we need? Are we getting towards that, or we still have a lot of holes in our data supply chain?
I would say that probably depends from company to company and how well advanced they are in collecting and managing the data. But looking at from a supply chain and traceability point of view, I think both regulation and new technologies have enabled to have much better traceability nowadays than we did in the past. So I think might get a little bit too technical now, but for example, regulations like EUDR, who still not have been really implemented, where you need to have full traceability on, where your cocoa beans come from. You need to be able to show the plots of where the cocoa was grown. Regulations, at least, although they're not always the most fun things to deal with, at least they help us make advancements in areas like traceability.
And then you have a different type of certifications that also push for that, right? The Rainforest Alliance and so forth. Now, if you allow me, let me just shake things up a little bit and get here to a segment which we call Press and Guess. And the whole idea is for me to throw a few questions at you and you try to answer them as fast as you can. Is that okay?
Sure.
What can be more difficult, planning to budget for next year or executing a project with half the budget that you have?
Execution is always more difficult, I would say. Planning is easy, and then executing your plan is always the difficult part, let alone if you have only half the budget. So I think that's an easy one.
I also think so. This is such an easy one. Yeah, because I love planning. When you plan on your Excel file and everything works perfectly, right? Then you're executing, and as we said in the beginning, many things can happen, right?
Exactly, yes.
A board meeting or a night shift in the factory, what's the best way to learn?
That one, it depends. It really depends on what you want to learn. If I could, I would recommend anybody to attend a board meeting and also do a night shift in a factory. If you want to be close to what is happening on the shop floor, and if you want to have on the shop floor a perspective as to why certain decisions are taken the way they are taken, you need a little bit of exposure to both in an ideal world to learn the most.
Yeah, you touch on something that it took me quite a while to learn. And even when I was working very much on the shop floor on continuous improvement projects, I think there's a huge gap on the shop floor in order to understand what ticks the company and the business. Why are we doing certain things in terms of the business and money? What's the product that is more profitable? What is the section that is more profitable? Why are we launching this and that? But I feel that nowadays we still don't communicate that as well or as we should. Do you feel that? Is that something that you're worried about, this communication, that everyone understands, from top to bottom? Why are we doing this?
No, it's an extremely important thing. And it's becoming ever more important also because of what I would say the newer generations, also the millennials already. I mean, you and I were millennials. We're not anymore the newer generations, the younger ones, but already millennials care, I would say, much more about the why. Why are we doing certain things in a certain way? So I think that's the reason why a lot of companies, struggle more and more with that gap between, information or understanding, at least on different levels in the company. And that's why I believe communication is extremely important. And the company where I work today, our own CEO invests a lot of effort and time in making sure that there are certain messages landing directly on the shop floor. Because we are an international company, we have employees all over the world. Every few weeks, he'll record the CEO video where he'll also explain, say, hey, this is how we're doing. This is the reason why we're going to go this way. And, and then us as ExCo members also have our own town halls where, now twice a year, I'll get everybody together. And of course, in groups, because we're talking about a lot of people. And I'll try and communicate the most important decisions that we've taken and especially give context to them.
Your worst nightmare, what is it? A machine breakdown or a late raw material delivery?
Well, first of all, I don't think my worst nightmare would be in the context of a chocolate factory. I only have the most beautiful dreams when it comes to chocolate factories. If I would have to choose, probably in today's context, I would say it's more the raw materials, because we're very, very, very picky on which raw materials that we choose and that we source. So if we have a delay on a very important one, for us, it's much more challenging to find the same quality in short notice.
If you have to choose between, efficiency and quality, where do you put your effort in?
Quality, any day. I mean, again, Läderach stands for high quality, but it's, regardless of company. I think if any company whether the product or service is critical. If you ever have to choose between both, and I highly recommend to have quality as your highest priority, because that's in the end what's driving the value behind your business.
I have to ask you, which one do you prefer, the Swiss chocolate or the Belgium chocolate?
Ah, you cannot do that to me, Marco. You cannot do that. I plead the fifth. You're asking a Belgian guy working for a Swiss chocolate company. No, let me say this. Both the Swiss and the Belgians know very well, have very long chocolate making traditions and know very well how to make chocolate. I would say the only difference is that in Switzerland, you also have requirements to the raw materials that you use. In Switzerland, you have to use, you cannot use Swiss cocoa beans because they don't grow here, but you have to use Swiss milk. But other than that, I will keep it at that both countries know very well how to make chocolate.
And me, as a half Swiss, I also have a dog on that race, so I do understand that. But I would love to do blind testing to a lot of people and to see actually what would turn out. But okay, thank you very much for playing along. Let's go back to the more serious part of the conversation. Something that I would love to pick your brain on is we hear a lot about real-time data, IoT, and so sensors and so forth. And when we started this journey, it was not as spoken about, and paper was everywhere. How are you seeing the evolution of operations in general, but production shop floors, but also operations in general with this technology coming in?
It's a good point. It is and it isn't. All these things, when they arrive, and I think you see the same a little bit with AI, the potential is obvious and it's huge. What tends to happen, however, and the same on the question you just asked me in digitalization, if I can call it that way, sometimes hypes are created and companies take decisions to invest in digitization without really having done their proper research into how it can help them and how it can advance them. And I've seen quite a lot of companies, and whether it's case studies or company visits or people telling me in my network, we've invested in digitization here, but the payback wasn't there. And that doesn't mean, however, that the potential is huge. And I truly believe that, depending, of course, on the application, the potential is there. It's just very important that you do your background study and you don't digitize or include AI just because you're doing so. You need to understand why you're doing it, and you need to be able to make sure that it matches your current shop floor operations and the culture that you have going on in the company.
Yeah, but on the other hand, don't you think that sometimes we spend too much time, analyzing and building business case rather than trying to test the technology out, just doing small little proof of concepts and so forth?
That's a fair point, especially in this area where sometimes things are also very often the first step of digitalization is getting data. And before you actually get the data, it's very hard to know what you're actually able to do with it. I don't know if I'm making sense to you here. So
Sure.
I didn't mean we have to do more business cases and we have to analyze like crazy. I think nothing speaks against doing certain pilots and kind of doing this trial and error. But I think there's nothing wrong with that, and I actually support initiatives like that. Where I think it gets tricky is when companies decide, well, now I'm going to digitalize that, and I'm going to my whole shop floor in 2 years need to be digital. What does that even mean? That's where I see the last couple of years certain hypes in different companies, but nothing against trial and error.
I completely understand what you mean. Is like, you should not come and say the goal is to be digitalized in 2 years. It should be the other way around. That should be something that comes out of the good initiatives that you're finding, right? And sometimes we change the focus. And that also most of the times might lead to a bad implementation because you're just worried about getting that, that end goal and not really what is the return that you're looking for when implementing such solutions. But help me understand, I might be saying this the wrong way, but I see Läderach as a very handcrafted premium company with that DNA. Of course, you have machines and automation and all of that, but is it harder to bring this type of technologies to such a culture and mindset or not?
Well, first of all, yes, Läderach is very much on the handcrafted side of the chocolate making industry. And I think that's also a cool thing. And the thing is, I can't really manage to explain it to anybody unless they ever visit our factory. You cannot explain, you have to see it live, what the benefit is for us doing all of those things by hand, or doing a lot of things by hand. You have to see it to understand and feel and see how much love and dedication goes into that product. That does not mean, however, that there is not certain processes, sub-processes, that cannot be automated and optimized. So again, here, I don't think the relevant question is how automated is a process before you're going to include also digitalization. I think more relevant indeed to your question as towards culture is how open are people for any kind of change. And, maybe talking about Läderach again a little bit, that's the cool thing. It has evolved and grown so much over the last couple of years that change. There's people here when I talk to them that have been here for 30, 40. There's a guy who recently had his 45th year at the company who's known it when it was just a few people in production. Right now we have in one side, or in all sides, we have hundreds of people. So they've been through a tremendous amount of change, which makes, from my perspective, this company also so remarkable, that it's managed to also still kind of stay true to its quality standards and processes because the people have been so open to change. And I think the openness to change is much more important than how automated your processes already are.
But you do hear how incredible hard it is to get that, what you just said, fully like true to a culture that is very traditional now on a massive global scale. Come on, tell us, what is the secret there? How are you able to do that?
Well, I think we already touched upon certain of those things, like, for example, communication, bridging the gap between, why do we want to grow? Why is it a good thing to grow and to become more international? And as well, we are a family company still. As I said, the family is extremely visible, and, that creates also a certain level of loyalty. I believe we have a very nice company culture. And that's not something that you create just like that. That's something that grows over time.
I know culture is one of those things that people talk a lot about it. It's something that when I started working, it's like culture. It sounded just HR, nice things to say. But it's amazing when you have a culture in your organization working and seeing how it works. If it's going the wrong way, you see that immediately and it takes a long time to correct. And when it's working the right momentum, I think everything is the most important, crucial part. But I see that with 20 people to 30 people that we are here, such with different places and so forth. How do you maintain, how do you cultivate that culture? If you're new hiring, new blood coming in, how do you maintain that loyalty to the initial culture? And of course it evolves, but the same backbone.
I think a very important part of that, very frequently underestimated, it starts with recruiting. As a company, you have certain values, certain things that are important to you as a company, ideally also to your employees, because they feel and think the same. I'm not saying hire exactly the same people, because that speaks against being a complementary team. But when it comes to the fundamental values and how well you feel in that environment, is so important to make sure that you maintain that culture. I think to make it more complex for you, however, what I think is even more so a challenge is companies growing internationally. Because again, for me, from an operations perspective, I have most of the people here in Switzerland. At least I'm recruiting most of the people here in Switzerland. Supply chain is a little bit different. Retail is very different. We're hiring entirely local teams. And, hiring a team in Japan versus one in US versus in China, how do you drive that company culture over all of those different countries? That is a challenging part. But as I said, also there, it starts already with recruitment and understanding the differences between the cultures and somehow anyway make it work in your overarching company culture.
What is something from a recruiting perspective that you see as a massive mistake and something that you see as a must do?
Well, in recruiting in general, a mistake that I have made myself a couple of times, I must admit, luckily it's been a while, but is sometimes you think you have a good candidate on paper, but there is this kind of belly feeling where you're like, there's this one thing, but I'll take the risk. More often than not, it means don't do it because it's not going to end up well. So I think that's probably the most, and I know I'm not the only one. I speak to people about this all the time because I've been recruiting a lot of people in my career. This is probably a very common mistake that one should avoid.
I know. And why do we do it?
I don't know.
I know because from my opinion, it's like recruiting process are long. And sometimes you're there on your short list and have this 1-2 candidates. And if you don't go with that one, that we will need to restart the whole thing again. And we're talking about months of work and so forth. So you want to believe in yourself, this will work out. Hopefully it will work out. And then you eventually need to come to the hard conclusion. No, it will not. But then what is a good thing? Allow me to just be on a positive side. What is something that you think has to be part of the process somehow?
That's a good point. And I don't know if it's a must, but what I like to do are a few things, especially in factory settings. If I hire somebody who has a very close touch points with the factory, I will invite them to visit the factory or visit multiple factories to, first of all, get kind of a feeling if they can imagine a factory culture. And if, also to see how they act on a factory shop floor. You can actually, by doing a visit, a company or a factory visit, you can see so much from a candidate just by how do they greet the people when they walk by? Do they ask questions? Do they show a certain amount of interest? And the other part, which I really like to do is once I've got a short list or ideally one candidate where I think this is going to be the candidate, I like to also set up a round with potential peers and even team members so that they get to know each other and I can collect feedback a little bit more kind of 360 degrees before I hire somebody. I think that's one of the good ways to make sure that there's a fit. Now, I must admit, this is not something you can do always, but wherever relevant and possible, I like to do that.
100% agree with you. Like the first part where you try to bring it into the natural habitat where they will work. And the second one for me is also very important from a perspective of having someone less emotionally connected with that recruiting process. That also helps because sometimes you're already very emotionally connected with it. You spend many times and someone coming outside and saying, hey, by the way, I don't think this will work. Or actually, hey, I love the person. It's a great validation, right?
Absolutely. That's true. That's important. I mean, you said it before also, and that's indeed the reason why we sometimes do make mistakes is this so-called confirmation bias. You think at one point you have a good candidate, and then, once that's in your head, you kind of try and explain to yourself, well, no, it's a good one. And you're much less likely to at one point admit and kind of, make the right decision.
And you also talk about how this new generation is coming in, which I also think might be more picky where they work and the conditions they have. How do you pitch to them a manufacturing gig?
Again, in today's digital world and, where screens are always becoming more important, everything in IT and all of that, I find amazingly fascinating. And I understand that a lot of people want to develop themselves in that direction. But I think the one thing that is missing, and it will be missing even more in the future, is that things are on a shop floor extremely tangible. They're extremely tangible. You can see and feel the impact that you have as a person and you understand it. And I think as, making the link to AI again, AI as such, that machine learning and everything behind it, it's become very difficult for us normal humans to really understand what's happening in the background. And for me personally, to see the impact, to understand what I'm doing is something that's important for me and that makes my current job a lot more fun.
You're talking about technology and we're talking about products being premium and handmade. I heard, maybe it's me just geeking out, but I heard that there's now things like 3D printed food and lab grown cocoa. Is that actually the future that is going to be more lab based? Or is this just pure nonsense?
I don't think it's pure nonsense. I think there's going to be quite some future applications, for lab-grown food stuff. I've seen a lot of pretty interesting things there. Now, for Läderach, I don't think that the future necessarily is there because for us as a brand, it's about, the best of the best chocolate. And a lot of samples I've already seen it's more like, okay, it tastes kind of like it, but it's not yet where you're like, okay, this is absolute natural ingredient, good tasting chocolate. Again, do I think there's applications or interesting applications for industrial producers? For sure. I think that will come. But for a high quality premium chocolatier, I'm not so sure.
Will that ever be a future where I will be eating and tasting a chocolate bar that no human has touched it? So it was made by AI, was run by factories with no lights, fully automated. Will that happen one day? Will it be as tasty as the one I just had last weekend, which is so, it's by the way, it's expensive. Like a small little piece of chocolate, super expensive, but so good. Like it's it's the same as you're describing. Like you have to go to the factory floor. It's the same as eating that. It's impossible to describe it. I had to stop it. I had to just hide it because I was eating everything. It's awesome. But do you think that you can bring that quality into a very automated process?
That would be difficult to do so. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think we have the technology today to make it look and feel and taste the way it does today. But I could be wrong. We never know where technology will take us.
It's true. But from your point of view, it's not in the near future. You don't see it in the near future coming.
Again, I think industrial applications for chocolate, they will be coming in the near future, and they are already coming.
And going here a little bit to the end, I have two more questions I would love to ask you is, you have seen, and as you described your Monday mornings, is look into what is the crisis that I need to focus on and hopefully a good problem to solve. And I can imagine you're very much, your daily basis is dealing a little bit with crisis. If you would go back to 2012 and you're a trainee in Indonesia, what would you tell yourself about how to manage a work-related crisis?
Okay, so first of all, luckily I don't deal with crises at work every day, but coming back to your question, if I would give myself advice there, I would say, first of all, keep your head cool and be ready to learn. Especially when you're young and new to operations in general, it's really the crises where you bring people together and when you have to collectively very frequently solve problems. And these are, from a management and technical perspective, always very, very interesting from a learning point of view. And also for the rest of your future career. It keeps companies that go through crises that are not fundamental in a way that they, really do a lot of damage. Most companies go through some level of crises. They keep you alert and they keep you able to be flexible and change to circumstances. So if I could give myself a tip in 2012 back in Indonesia, keep your head cool and be ready to learn.
And when you look at Läderach for the next coming years, where do you see the big challenges coming up?
Making sure that we grow the company at the pace that we're doing and keeping that quality that you described just now so nicely. You're a very good marketing guy, Marco. We will use that in one of our ads. But you're exactly right. That's how our chocolate tastes. And very fundamental to me is, and that's why, again, talking about automation, we're very interested in automation, but never where it does any kind of compromise to the quality of the product. So that is, in all transparency, my biggest challenge over the next years is growing the way we do and making sure that the quality, does not get worse. On the contrary, we want to make it better. The world of continuous improvement, and as long as you have a mindset to make things better, I think you don't run the risk of getting worse. On the contrary, I think you need to be able to take step-by-step improvements also on the level of quality.
I really envy that challenge. I would love to be there and helping you on that challenge. It's amazing. And especially having that, like the nice chocolate around you. Lawrence, thank you very much for this interview. It was really awesome. It was great to hear your insights. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It was nice talking to you.
Join our Connected Shopfloor communities on LinkedIn and Reddit. And subscribe our channels.